Hi, my name is Dave Isaacs. I'm coming to you from Dave Isaacs Guitar Studio on Music Row in Nashville, Tennessee. And today I want to talk to you about technique. Technique specifically having to do with the way that you approach the guitar, the way that you use your hands, the way that you pluck or strum, the way that your left hand sits on the neck. And more specifically, the idea that there is perfect technique or ideal technique, and then there is practical technique, the things that you see players actually doing. Perfect technique or ideal technique is what most teachers are going to teach. And it's based on something very important. The basic idea comes from physics. It's the idea of simple machines and leverage. We want to maximize the sound we produce, the tone we produce, the volume we produce, but we want to minimize the muscular effort that's required to do it. Now, this is a very worthwhile thing, and this is something that we do want to do. Ultimately, it makes playing the guitar easier and not harder. But some people are going to be very rigid about the way that they ask you to use your hands, and this is where I start to take issue with some people. Let's take, for example, the left hand and the position of the thumb, and this is a big one because you hear about this all the time. My first teacher said this. Lots of your teachers may have said this, but they'll say your thumb should never come over the top part of the neck. And I'm going to disagree with that. If you're playing in a position like this, and this would be like a classical guitarist, or maybe a jazz player, or say a blues player like B.B. King, who's pretty much never playing rhythm, notice when I bent the string, I still had the thumb come up. But it is true that my thumb's in the center of the neck right now. No, I'm not pushing, it's just balancing. Think of walking down a flight of stairs and you've got a banister that you reach over and you touch, and you don't hang on to it, you don't grip it. It's really a spatial thing between your fingers and your brain. It just lets you know where you are. Okay? So my thumb is sitting here touching the back of the neck. But you notice how elevated the neck of the guitar is. This is not the way that you play rhythm guitar most of the time. If you play primarily lead, then this is good and this is worthwhile, although there's nothing wrong with playing lead. Let me back up a little so you can see. This way. With the straight neck. But notice when the neck is straightened, where my thumb is. The reason my thumb is sitting on top of the neck is that the most important thing is that my wrist is straight. If you hold your left hand out in front of you, or your fretting hand out in front of you, open the fingers, bring them in and make a fist. This is how you've got grip. Grip comes from a straight wrist. Try bending your wrist and making a fist, and you'll feel through here the additional tension, the additional effort that's required. That's the reason that's not necessarily good technique, because it's just making you work harder than you should. A straight wrist will allow you to maximize both the weight of your hand and arm and the muscular effort, which really should be minimal at this point, to play those notes. Now, if we're talking about open chords, that same idea applies. See how my thumb is sitting up on top of the neck, but you also can see, especially if I turn a little bit, my wrist is straight, and it takes very small changes to get from one chord to the next. It's really more about the fingers than it is about the wrist. So once again, we maintain the strongest gripping position. Now, on the other hand, if I need to play bar chords, you don't see my thumb up there anymore, do you? Because to play a bar chord, I need to drop the wrist. And the reason is, number one, I need to be able to stretch further in order to accomplish this smoothly. And number two, what I find is that it helps to have the knuckle directly below the bar. But all of these things, it's really important that you keep this in mind, all of these things, even though they're based around these concepts of Simple physics, simple machines, leverage, maximizing sound, minimizing force, things like that. It's still all contingent upon two things: the size of my hand, the proportion of my fingers to the rest of my hand, and the size and shape of my guitar and the neck. Okay? Someone with a much longer thumb might do this, and their thumb might show over the top of the neck. Someone with much bigger hands, for example, might be able to do this without having to drop the wrist quite so far. And there's a lot of variation there, and this is really my primary point. There is such a thing as ideal technique in terms of following those principles of physics I've been talking about. But if you watch your 10 favorite guitar players, I'll bet you'll see 10 different things. And in fact, I'll bet that maybe 8 of them, if not all 10, will probably have some kind of idiosyncrasy to their technique, where they'll play in a way that no teacher would be likely to ever teach, but yet they play that way and it works for them. And the reason for that is, essentially, we're talking about a physical mechanism here, the hand, and another physical mechanism here, the guitar. And your goal is to make them get along. And you do that by feeling and seeing what feels right, what allows you to reach the notes you need to reach. Because I don't have particularly big hands, I avoid big stretches. It just doesn't work well for me. I can stretch if I need to. This is not something I do on a regular basis. If I were playing classical music, where you don't get to choose the notes, then the ideal technique is important because you need to be able to reach any combination of notes the composer is asking for. But in almost any other genre, of course we want to maximize our skill. We want to maximize our available technique, because then the more ideas you have, the better you can execute them, right? Or you can better execute the ideas that you have, is really what I mean to say. So I'm not contradicting that, but what I'm saying is that good technique is not about your thumb must be here or your thumb must not be here, because the fact is, between the variables in the construction of our hands and the variables in the construction and shape of guitars, there has to be a certain amount of variation there. In fact, you'll notice that when I move my hand here, my thumb position is changing as I play through the scale. So I'm not sticking to one position specifically. I'm changing positions based upon what I need to reach each spot. And this is not something that I was taught. This is something that I learned from observing my own hands, from observing other people play. And this is the way you're ultimately going to learn. A teacher is always a great asset to have. A teacher helps you learn a whole lot faster. But at the same time, you've got to be paying attention yourself and seeing what works and what doesn't. Something new isn't going to work right away. That's a natural expectation. But you should think of this, that if you struggle with something over a period of days, weeks, or months, and it's still not happening, then maybe the problem isn't that you're not good enough to execute whatever it is you're trying to execute. Maybe there's just a better way to do it. So keep that in mind. This is Dave Isaacs coming to you from Dave Isaacs Guitar Studio on Music Row in Nashville. Thanks for watching.